Good afternoon, Mary Kay. It's lovely to have you with us at SpiritAotearoa.
Thanks. It's very nice to be here.
Would you like to start with telling us a little bit about yourself and what are your hopes in terms of sharing conversations on spirituality and work?
Oh, well, I'm a nurse and I've worked in lots of different settings. I think it's one of the things that's allowed nursing to stay interesting is to move around and do different things. Um, and I guess in terms of hopes for participating in this, I guess rather selfishly, I want to explore for myself how I've intertwined spirituality in the work that I've done. And I think by talking about it, yeah, some of that will come to the fore for me, and I might have some new understanding of it.
Thank you, thank you. Is there a time that you can particularly remember in your childhood when you were aware of what spirituality was for you?
Oh, I think I was quite puzzled about what spirituality was for quite a long time because I was raised Catholic and had 12 years of Catholic schooling. So from a very early age was, involved in sort of the ritual and some of the music of Catholicism. And I think the music was probably the thing that I didn't put words to it, but had a sense of spirituality inside myself. Because we were in a choir and actually sang in Latin, and there was something very moving about all of that as a child. So I think that's the first sense I had of spirituality, though I don't think I really understood it or put words to it till much later in life.
So, if I'm hearing you right, there's a connection between the individual, you, and then some sense of connection if you were in a choir, shared voice, a shared heartbeat,
Yes.
something like that?
It was almost like, in some ways, because it was in Latin, and we didn't know the meaning of the words necessarily, some gist of them perhaps, but it was almost like a chant. Is how I've come to understand my experience back then. That took me to some place inside myself that was quiet and peaceful and, yeah, lovely.
So, spirituality would be something about being quiet and peaceful and lovely.
It is, and also at the same time, it is, a part of it was that shared voice with other people, all doing the same thing and all having the same goal, and yeah, being together in that and making these beautiful sounds.
So, you're an adult now, and so when or how were you conscious of spirituality as an adult? Was there a particular time?
Um, well, fairly early in my adult life, I started taking yoga, and that has been a big part of my spiritual process, I think. Um, Both, the exercise practices, but also the breathing and the meditation type practices in yoga. And I think always it has had that element of uh, quiet and having some sense of myself that I'm not able to get in the normal hubbub of everyday life most of the time. I guess attempting to bring that into the normal daily routine of my life is one of the goals at this stage of life.
Is there a recent experience you've had of yoga and coming into that loveliness of yourself amidst the hurly-burly of life? Is there?
Well, I did go to a yoga retreat recently. I go to a yoga class regularly, and I went to basically an ashram here in New Zealand on the South Island and spent about 10 days there, basically living that life, that schedule, which was very involved in meditation and the yoga, morning chanting, and then work, where we tried to incorporate the yoga practices into the work we were doing.
Sounds a wonderful opportunity. I'm interested in how you understand perhaps the practice of spirituality in your nursing work now, in terms of the rhythm of the day, the patterns of a work day, the relationships. Can you tell me anything about that?
Probably the first way that I realized that the yoga practices were sort of invading, in a very nice way, my day-to-day life was that I discovered if I didn't go to the yoga practices, I would find myself more short-tempered, more irritable more easily, and that something about going to the yoga practices helped me to stay calmer and have a smoother sort of work life. So that was a really important realization to notice that that made a big difference in my life. And I guess then I started incorporating it more. So I think even prior to that, though, because I think the hardest part is building it into every minute of every day. So prior to that realization and beginning to notice the way I build it into the daily routine was incidents that would occur between me and a patient or me and a student, or maybe me and another staff member, where that spirituality got tapped into or touched in a way that made the experience better for both of us, I think.
It sounds in the way you're speaking that the experience was also deeply transforming.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's, I think for me, I don't necessarily notice on an incident by incident basis the transformation, but over time, one of the things I've had the opportunity to do is spend time with a lot of patients who are near the end of their lives, either because of illness or age or both. And I think, that part of what that's done for me is some transformation around how I see death and, my acceptance of death, or the perspective I have on death as a part of this life.
Tell me about your perspective on death as part of this life.
Well, I really just see it as a transition, and not necessarily a bad one at all. Sometimes a painful one, and I think that's certainly one of the goals in my work, is to make it a less painful or help make it a less painful or less scary proposition for people. And I think, some of the yoga practices help with that, just with breathing and helping people to be centered and calm if they get frightened during that process. And then, of course, there's just using plain old regular medical traditional methods of giving people pain control, and those sort of things help people through that process. But I see it as quite a natural thing and quite a, I think it's in a sense it's a traumatic thing, just as our birth into this world is a traumatic event for our souls, I think. So it's a huge event. But I guess part of the spirituality around death that I have a sense of is a sense of what awaits the person on the other side. And that there's some lovely things there, probably. I don't know for sure, because I don't think I've been there. I don't have any memory of it. But, a sense of the people that loved them and that they loved in their lives being on the other side, waiting to welcome them. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, my perspective on death. and what that's about. It doesn't make it easier, I think, to leave the ones we love here in this lifetime, but there is a whole group of people waiting there for that person.
That's a really wonderful, rich description, and thank you for the courage of sharing it. It's not something we share every day. I was mindful as you were speaking that maybe spirituality opens up spaces in you to also hold the tension or the pain alongside someone else in their journey. Would you agree with me, or would you not agree?
It's hard to say. Yes, I think that's probably true as I think about it, because it's not particularly scary for me. And what I find is that generally towards the end, people are often not afraid of death. And maybe the expectation is that people be fearful of death, or, I don't know where that comes from. But when you get sort of underneath what's going on, a lot of people are actually quite ready to let go and even voice that.
So they go back to where they came from, and perhaps you're saying that they go back to where they came from, or the space beyond words, or the...
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's as useful a way of thinking about it as I can come up with, for sure.
Tell me about your sense of the purpose of human life.
Oh, that's a big question.
It's probably a working document. We're all working on it. But,
yes. Well, someone told me recently that they had read a book, and I can't really remember the name of the book, but it's something like The Buddha of New York City or something, or of Manhattan. I don't know exactly the title, but one of the lines in the book struck her, and I think it was towards the end of the book, and the writer said that at the end of his journey, what he had decided was that the purpose of life was to suffer what there is to suffer and to enjoy what there is to enjoy. And I think that's really good. And when she and I talked about that, we talked about, what does he mean by that? And to suffer what there is to suffer, but not go beyond that. We don't have to live there. We don't have to stay in that suffering place 24/7. We can acknowledge it and suffer it and move on and enjoy, just as on the other side of that.
I have a love for your definition. I think I share that one as well. I wondered how you would define nursing as a profession. Like, if you could define it in a sentence based on your experience, well, how would you define nursing?
Oh my goodness. Well, with lots of different tools of various kinds, I think it is really helping people to find the most well place they can be. Yeah.
And helping people find the most well place they could be. So what does that do to you as a helper?
I don't know what it does to me, actually. I mean, I think at times it probably is frustrating to me or sad to me when I see people not being able to do that because of some barrier or something, in their way. Whether it's their own inability to care for themselves or the lack of people around them to assist them in that process. And then on the other hand, when people are able to find that kind of wellness within themselves. It's lovely to be able to see that and be with them while they do that.
I'm going to ask you to, if you wouldn't mind, just let me know your definition of spirituality. You've defined nursing.
Mm-hmm.
What is your definition of spirituality?
I guess it is finding or feeling that connection with something bigger than ourselves. The universe, an order to the universe, a universe that supports us. And at the same time, I think that connection to a higher self or higher being or a bigger picture is that integral to that is a sense of ourselves and a centeredness within ourselves. So it's something about that place inside ourselves, which is quiet and peaceful and calm, and that has a sense of a higher order to things.
There's a wonderful richness in your description, and it is very beautiful. And it takes me back to the original statement you made about being part of the singing in Latin of the Mass in the early days of your life. Yeah. So is there a parallel between spirituality and your definition of work, do you think?
I think there is a connection, and I don't know that all nurses necessarily recognize it or could put words to it. And I think that it's possible to work and not intertwine any sense of spirituality into it. But I think, that whole sense of helping or being with other people, doing things that facilitate the other person, being in touch with that place within themselves, is definitely a part of nursing work if you're incorporating some spirituality into it.
How, as a teacher of nursing, would you pass the triggers for that on to somebody else who might be asking about it or wondering, is this all just to do the tasks of washing a patient in a hospital bed? Is this all there is? How do you signal there's a deeper way of being?
Well, that is a tricky question, or a tricky thing to accomplish, I think. Because I think that some people come to nursing with, a much, that sense of themselves or a sense of spirituality already established, whereas others come to it with, this is a career and I'm going to make this much money at it when I get out, and that's going to be wonderful. So I think, embedded in any nursing education, I think, and certainly as a teacher, I found just the teaching of respect for the other person as we're doing those things, respect through the ways in which we handle their bodies, the way in which we talk to them through procedures, explaining to them and letting them know how they can have some control in that. Those are all things we can teach students to do. I think probably one of the biggest ways I've tried to do that in my own career has been through role modeling it for my students. And, because, you do have students who come from all walks of life. And, I've had students who have had really, really difficult childhoods with parents, a mother who was schizophrenic, for example, who ended up in a prison at the time that this young woman was a student with me. And going into some of the settings that we went into brought up those memories of her mother's growing up with her mother's schizophrenia and the pain of all of that. And in that situation, it was just allowing her to experience that and being with her and giving her the space to grieve over how painful that was to see patients who were very similar to her mother.
So spirit touches in many places in many ways, and there's ways that you can almost encode it into the way you are. If people don't speak or understand about it intellectually, they can certainly learn behaviours that may in the future lead them to name spiritual practices.
Yes.
The relationship you draw, bringing people's attention to relationship of respect, seems very powerful. And in terms of thinking about your practice in New Zealand with nursing, do you think there's been ever any barriers in the workplace to spirituality?
I think the biggest barrier to spirituality is time. There is so much required in terms of the tasks that must be accomplished in a day, or whether that's the meds. It's basically a workload issue, because there are certain things that have to be done, and then there's all the documentation that goes with that. And it's quite easy for, touching people in those ways to be sort of at the bottom of the list of things to do. And that's probably the biggest barrier. And I think, it's up to the individual, really, to seize the opportunity, to recognize that the opportunity and the need to be there in that way with another person is there, and to just step back from those other things and do that. But I do think that that's something that's not always recognized by management. It's not, in the daily time studies as something that's valuable to do necessarily. So that's the biggest barrier, I think.
I can remember that the ways of entering space in time with spirituality kind of almost gives you a timelessness as well, to show how a child is held against your heart rather than held out in your arms away from somebody.
Yes.
To teach a parent how to learn the acts of love before they feel the love sometimes for a child with a disability. You're speaking about really everyday acts of courage that you do in nursing, that you are in nursing. Are there any comments that you'd like to contribute further, that you'd like to leave with our viewers as we come to the close of our time? Is there anything we haven't spoken about that you would like to mark here?
Perhaps just that I'm trying to think about that, and I guess one of the things I could say about it is that when I am with another person and we are sharing that space of a sense of spirituality, and that really all is right with things at this very moment, no matter what is happening, there is almost a certain feeling I get, and I don't know what to call it exactly. Although it's not exactly this, it's almost like an aura. It's almost like some sense of the two of us being enclosed in some sort of special space with one another. And that's really, really special. And at the heart, I guess, of it all.
Thank you. That's a powerful sense, yes, and a really healing space to build and have the courage to inhabit with someone else. I thank you for your courage to share and to contribute your voice to others and other women of other professions in terms of spirituality and their work. I think we all agree that if we stop speaking about what's important to us, our lives begin to end. And in some ways, we've been encouraged not to speak about spirituality. So I'd like to really thank you. There's a small gift that we'd like to pass to you and to say thank you for today.
Oh, well, thank you. Really, just being here is gift enough. I really appreciate the opportunity to do this and just talk about it. Yes, and give spirituality and nursing a bit of a voice. So,
Kia ora, perfect.
thank you.